Every old subway system has its ghost stations. It's platforms that were bypassed, sealed off, erased from the map. The transit authority locks the stairwells and walks away, leaving the tracks to rust and the tunnels to fill with silence. But a sealed entrance doesn't mean the station is empty. And if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can still hear the trains. Welcome to True Terror Files, official. Abandoned subway stations are a special kind of dark. It's not just the absence of light, it's the weight of the city above you. It's millions of people going about their lives while you're standing in a place they forgot existed. The air is thick with the smell of old steel, damp concrete, and the faint electrical tang of the third rail that's been dead for 50 years. Track inspectors, maintenance crews, and the occasional urban explorer are the only ones who ever see these places. And most of them have a story they don't tell their supervisors. Tonight, 3 people who went into the abandoned sections shared the moments they realized the stations weren't as abandoned as the maps claimed. A track inspector in New York who saw a woman waiting on a platform where no train has stopped since 1945. A maintenance worker in Boston who heard machinery running in a tunnel that had been sealed for 30 years. And a security guard in Chicago who heard an announcement from a station that isn't supposed to exist. Let's head down to the platform. Adira Vance had been a track inspector for the MTA for 4 years when she pulled the overnight shift assignment that took her through the old City Hall loop. The City Hall station was a legend, a gorgeous curved platform with Guastavino tile arches and brass fixtures. Opened in 1904 and closed in 1945 because the new, longer trains couldn't navigate its tight curve. The station still sat at the end of the 6 trains downtown loop. And every night, the last train would pass through it on its way back uptown, the passengers on board catching a fleeting glimpse of the elegant, abandoned platform through the windows. Adira's job was to walk the loop tracks after the last train had passed and inspect the rails for wear. She'd done it a dozen times. It was creepy but routine. She dropped down from the track level just south of the station, clicked on her headlamp, and began walking the curve. The tunnel was tight, the walls closed, the air heavy with the smell of old brake dust and damp concrete. The rails gleamed in her light, polished by the daily passage of trains. As she rounded the curve and stepped onto the City Hall platform, her beams swept across the tiles, the brass chandeliers, the empty archways, and then it landed on a figure. A woman, standing at the edge of the platform, looking down the tunnel as if waiting for a train. She was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, a long coat, a hat with a small veil, white gloves clasped in front of her. She wasn't moving. Adira's heart lurched. "Ma'am, you can't be down here. This station is closed." The woman didn't turn. She just lifted one gloved hand and pointed down the tunnel. "The train is coming," she said. Her voice was quiet, calm, almost musical. "I've been waiting a long time." Adira aimed her flashlight at the tunnel. No train, no headlights, no sound except the distant drip of groundwater. "There's no train. You need to come with me. I'll help you get back to the surface." The woman slowly turned her head. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and depthless. She looked at Adira with an expression of profound sadness. "There's always a train. It just never stops for me anymore." Adira took a step closer, and her light passed across the woman's feet. There were no feet, no legs below the knee, just a fading wisp of something like smoke dispersing. And in the puddle of water on the platform, the woman cast no reflection. Adira stumbled backward. The woman smiled a sad, knowing smile. "Don't worry, I'm used to it. No one stops. No one ever stops." And then she was gone. The platform was empty. The puddle was still. Adira stood there, shaking, her flashlight beam trembling on the tiles. She heard it then, the distant rumble of a train. But it wasn't coming from the tunnel ahead. It was coming from behind her. From the direction of the dead-end curve where no train could be, she ran. She ran along the platform, jumped down onto the tracks, and scrambled through the narrow tunnel toward the active line. She didn't stop until she reached the Brooklyn Bridge station, where she climbed onto the platform and sat on a bench, gasping. She filed no report about a trespasser. She told no one about the woman, but she researched the City Hall station later. On October 28, 1945, a woman named Margaret Holloway was waiting for a train on the City Hall platform. She was wearing her best clothes. She was on her way to meet her husband, who was returning from the war. The train arrived. She stepped forward to board, and the doors closed before she could get on. In frustration, she pounded on the door. The train pulled away. Witnesses said she stumbled, lost her balance, and fell onto the tracks as the train's rear car passed over her.
Oh.
She survived the initial impact, but died before help could arrive. Her ghost, they say, still waits on the platform, still waiting for a train that will never stop. Adira still works for the MTA. She still walks the City Hall loop, but she never walks it alone in her mind. And every time she rounds that curve, she sees a flicker of movement on the platform. A woman in a long coat, waiting. Oscar Del Valle was a ventilation technician for the MBTA, responsible for maintaining the massive fans and air shafts that kept Boston's subway tunnels breathable. The old East River Tunnel's pair of abandoned bores that had been bypassed in the 1970s when the system was rerouted were part of his inspection route, but only on paper. The tunnels had been sealed behind steel doors for decades, the ventilation equipment decommissioned, the power cut. He was supposed to check the seals and make sure no water was seeping in. On a damp November night, with the red line humming somewhere above him, Oscar made his way to the East River access door. The seal was broken. The heavy steel door was ajar, the padlock lying on the ground snapped from the inside. He shone his light through the gap. Darkness. The smell of old river water and machine oil. And a sound. Rhythmic thumping, like a pump. Oscar squeezed through the gap and stepped into the tunnel. The air was colder here, heavy with moisture. The tracks had been removed decades ago, leaving a flat concrete floor. His light caught the walls covered in the same green tile as the rest of the system, but stained black with mold and something that looked like old soot. The thumping was louder now, coming from farther down the tunnel. He followed it. The tunnel curved, and he came to a door set into the wall. Sign above it read Pump Room 14, authorized personnel only. The door was vibrating. He pushed it open. The room beyond was a small concrete chamber filled with machinery, a massive centrifugal pump. Its housing rusted, but its impeller spinning. It was pushing water. Water that was coming from a jagged crack in the floor. The pump was running. With no power, no fuel, no connection to anything. Oscar stared. The pump's bearings squealed. The water churned in the sump. And then he noticed the handprints. On the pump housing, on the walls, on the ceiling. Small handprints pressed into the rust and the grime, as if someone had been crawling all over the machinery. A voice spoke from behind him, close enough that he felt the breath on his neck. It's about time someone came down. The pump's been running dry for weeks. It's more water. There's water in the river. Just need to open the floodgate. Oscar spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. But the voice continued, now coming from the pump itself, vibrating through the metal. "Hey, we've been keeping it running since the tunnels flooded in '72. Someone has to. The city doesn't want the river coming back in, but we're tired. So tired. Can you take over?" Oscar backed toward the door. The pump's impeller began to spin faster. The shriek of dry bearings filling the chamber. The water in the sump started to churn furiously, and from the crack in the floor, a hand reached up, pale, bloated, grasping the edge of the concrete. Oscar ran through the tunnel, the thumping of the pump echoing behind him like a heartbeat. He squeezed through the gap in the steel door and slammed it shut, his heart pounding. He found a length of chain in a nearby storage locker and wrapped it around the door handle, securing it as best he could. Then he left. He filed a report that the East River Tunnel seal was compromised and recommended immediate reinforcement. He didn't mention the pump. He didn't mention the voice. He didn't mention the hand reaching up from the crack on the floor. But he researched the East River tunnels later. In February of 1972, a maintenance crew was working on a pump in the East River Tunnel when a floodgate failed. Water from the Charles River poured in. 3 men were trapped in the pump room. Their bodies were never recovered. The tunnels were sealed and bypassed. The pumps were supposed to be decommissioned. But Oscar knows they're still running, and he knows who's been maintaining them. Transferred to a bus depot job a month later, far from the underground tunnels. But sometimes on quiet nights, he swears he can still hear the thumping of that pump, somewhere far below, still pushing water, still keeping the river at bay, still waiting for someone to take over. Priya Chatterjee had been a CTA security supervisor for 6 years, and she'd grown accustomed to the strange acoustics of the Blue Line. The tunnels carried sound in weird ways. A conversation at one station could echo to another a mile away. But the Roosevelt Avenue mezzanine was a different kind of strange. It was a sealed level, closed since 1963 when the station was reconfigured. The stairwells were locked. The escalators had been removed. The only access was through a maintenance hatch in the ceiling of the active platform below. Priya's job on a slow November night was to inspect the mezzanine for any signs of water damage or structural issues before a planned renovation. Unlocked the hatch and pulled herself up into the dark. The mezzanine was a time capsule. Old wooden benches, a newsstand with yellowed magazines still on the racks, a ticket booth with a dusty glass window. The advertisements on the walls advertised cigarettes and ocean liners. Her flashlight swept across the scene, her boots leaving prints in the thick dust. She walked the length of the mezzanine, checking the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Everything was dry, stagnant air, the smell of old wood and dust. Then the speakers crackled. The station's PA system, dead for 60 years, hissed to life. A tone sounded, the familiar chime that precedes an announcement. And then a voice. A man's voice, calm and professional, with a slight Midwestern accent. "Attention passengers. The next Blue Line train to Forest Park will be arriving in 5 minutes. Please stand back from the platform edge. Thank you for riding the CTA." Priya froze. Speakers were not connected to anything. The station had no power. The announcement ended. Silence. Then, from the track level below the mezzanine, she heard it. A train. The rumble of wheels on rails. The hiss of brakes. The pneumatic sigh of doors opening. But the tracks below were active, yes, used by the modern Blue Line. The next train wasn't due for another 10 minutes. And the sound she was hearing was different. Older. The specific clatter of the old 6000 series cars, which had been retired in the 1990s. She crept to the edge of the mezzanine and looked down through a gap in the flooring. The platform below was empty, but she could hear passengers, the murmur of voices, footsteps, the shuffle of a crowd. And then the announcement came again, this time from the speakers in the active station below, as well as the mezzanine above. Attention passengers. This train is out of service. Please disembark. Repeat, this train is out of service. The voices of the phantom passengers changed. Murmuring turned to confusion, then shouting, then screaming. The sound of a train door closing. It's a screech of wheels. In silence, Priya didn't climb back down immediately. She stood frozen, listening, her heart slamming against her ribs. After a few minutes, she forced herself to move, descended the ladder, and went directly to the station supervisor's office. She told him there was a problem with the PA system, that it was broadcasting old announcements. The supervisor checked the logs. The PA system for the Roosevelt Mezzanine had been physically disconnected in 1963. There was no equipment up there capable of broadcasting anything. Priya researched the history of the station. In November of 1963, a Blue Line train approaching Roosevelt Avenue Station suffered a catastrophic brake failure. It barreled into the station at full speed, unable to stop. And the operator made the desperate decision to announce that the train was out of service, instructing passengers to disembark at the next station. But it was too late. The train derailed on the curve just beyond Roosevelt. 37 people died, many of them trapped in the wreckage for hours. The station was reconfigured in the aftermath, the mezzanine sealed, the platform rebuilt. Priya still works for the CTA, but she never goes near Roosevelt Avenue alone. Sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, the PA system at the station crackles to life, and a calm voice announces a train that will never arrive. 3 stations, 3 tunnels, and 3 encounters with the things the subway holds on to. Adira Vance found a woman still waiting on a platform where no train has stopped since 1945. Oscar Del Valle heard a pump, still running in a sealed tunnel, maintained by hands that should have been washed away decades ago. And Priya Chatterjee heard an announcement from a dead PA system, replaying a disaster that never truly ended. The old subway stations are still down. They're sealed behind steel doors and concrete, waiting silently under the feet of millions. But the next time you're on a late-night train and you glimpse a platform flash past the window, one that looks deserted and forgotten, remember, some stations never closed. Some passengers never got off. This has been True Terror Files Official. If you've ever worked in transit or gone somewhere underground that you shouldn't have, and seen something you can't explain, drop your story in the comments. Like, subscribe, ring that bell. And if you're ever waiting for a train in a quiet station and you hear an announcement that doesn't belong to this time, maybe let the next train pass.